Welcome to Making Room, a podcast inspiring people to accelerate change by being a catalyst, honoring creativity, and acting with courage. We are making room for the greatest potential of our community.
Welcome, you are welcome here. Welcome to this open door, dear. Our hands are reaching out for you. The floor is clear and we've made room for you.
Welcome back to Making Room. What an amazing morning here. We just got started as we usually do here in our song Welcome, which is going to be released very soon on all streaming platforms. It's an amazing day. We're here. We get a chance to, talk more about our episode with Brian Baltosiewich from Balto Creative Media and Queen City Podcast, our production team. So if you haven't yet, go back, check that one out. And I'm here with Brandon and Shivani, and I thought the theme of that one is just so important in today's society around amplifying voice. And I think we've learned so much as well from, sometimes I'll say for me personally, of minimizing what I have to say and this idea of the process of creative expression. So I'm really curious what you all took away. I took a ton of notes, and so Brandon, why don't we start with you, because you've got the journal rocking. Yeah. I'm so impressed over there.
I never take notes.
Very studious.
I never take notes, but I did take notes of Brian. He was dropping gems right and left. But the one thing that I really liked was what you have to say is infinitely more important than how you say it. And I would say in Brian's case, it's also infinitely more important than who says it for you, right? And so think about him on this journey, and I think I mentioned it to him, that if it had worked out how he wanted it to be, and he had been able to use his voice in the way that he thought he should have been able to use it or always dreamed of, we may not be sitting here today. Anyone in the studio may not be sitting here, or Queen City Podcast might not be here. And similarly, if he had been defeated and given up and just said, okay, well, I can't use my voice. I'm no longer, this just isn't going to work out for me. I'm going to go do banking or something else. Not any offense to banking. I did banking. But I think similarly, it wouldn't have worked out. And so he had something to say, and he found all of us to be able to say it in a way that maybe he couldn't, or just giving voice to so many others. And I think that is what was so powerful in this story, is that he created all these other voices and empowered all these other voices, even while he couldn't, in his mind, voice what he wanted to voice in the way that he always dreamed of as a kid.
That's a good reflection. I think also about, you talk about the message being more important than the actual delivery of the message. But on the flip side, even when we listen to messages, right? The delivery can be very different, but the message is often very clear. And so if we're paying attention and we're listening with openness, you can capture so much more information that way.
That's right.
Yeah, and for those of you who haven't heard that one, Brian, ever since he was young, had a self-described, stutter with the way he spoke. And I thought it was interesting, though, that none of us noticed that when we first started talking with him. And I noticed we talked some about this in, how we're trying to widen the definition of creativity is just to really honor the way people see and express the world in their eyes and with their words. And for him, when I hear him speak, it kind of slows me down. And I just think that the more we begin to dispel what is, quote, the right way of expression, right, is that, okay, well, yeah, music is just for entertainment. Well, no, music can be so amazingly powerful for healing. Music may be the way somebody knows how to express something. And I was struck last night as we were cooking out and had some friends in from Argentina. And my friend Enzo's mom, Alejandro, she just expresses through paint. And I watched her, all of a sudden her body is just passionate and emotional and she's moving. And I stopped her and I just said, ¿Qué sientas? Which means like, what are you feeling? And she's just like, I'm just in this right now. And I think that's what, when you see Brian in this work, and he's got such a phenomenal team here with Taylor and Tasha, and he's just he'll say things quick. And remember, we were out talking about our vision and values, and all of a sudden he's like, "This is what you all are doing," and we're like, "Oh, okay." And I think as we talk forward, that's not easy to do, right? Like what he's done to constantly put himself in an uncomfortable situation. But I feel like there's this calling, and I'm curious what you all have seen in that, in him and in you and other leaders, where what is it that has people do something, either for yourself or for others you've seen recently, where it's hard, but they're paying attention to something? Like what helps people make that shift in your eyes?
Yeah, one of the things that I think about, there's a book called Flow, and it talks a lot about how you can be in the zone, you can be in that state of flow when you are appropriately challenged and you have enough skills, right? So if you are not challenged and you have mad skills, you're going to get bored. Yeah. And then if you're super challenged and you don't have the skill, you're going to get overwhelmed. But if you have that good sense of good skills and enough challenge, you propel forward and you get in the zone. So I think, especially when you're in a place where you could potentially become complacent as a leader and say, this is good, like everything's working well, but you don't push yourself into that additional challenge. And maybe you have to develop some skills around that to continue to stay in the zone and stay in the flow. That's kind of where I see progress happening.
Yeah. I'm curious what you think, John.
Well, I'm blown away that you're talking about that. I've been reading this book called Deep Work, and the author talks about two distinctions. One being deep work, which is he references, Mikhail. I can't say his name correct in the last, but it is the book Flow, and he talks about you need a balance between meaning and challenge. And I was really struck by that because but it's very hard to get in that state, and that most of our time in especially Western U.S. culture is based on what he calls shallow work, which is the things that he was going through, like responding to emails and social media messages. And so we've begun to train our brains to focus on the shallow work, internet surfing, all these things. And it struck a chord with me because it made me realize how much I'm doing shallow work sometimes. And so the deep work is the kind that is harder to get inside, but once you do, that's he even talks about, sometimes refutes the notion of like all this relaxation time. We do need that, but sometimes it's important to be really intentional with your relaxation time. That, for me, like building a shelf or a table is super relaxing because I'm very attentive to it, or gardening or something like that. So I think that's so important as we go forward. And I'll say for me, I was inspired by Brian's as well, the courage to do what he's done every time. And it did inspire me to think, okay, how am I going to go deeper, right? And what are the things that are inside of us, the writing, the other things that really are just ready to go if I create that time to do that kind of work.
Yeah, that's a great point. Something you guys said resonated with me. So Flow I did a leadership assessment course recently, and there's a guy in Charlotte, actually, his name is Will Sparks, and he's a great leadership consultant, and he has this program called Actualized Leadership. And part of it talks about how well or quickly you can get into flow as one of your measurements as being an actualized leader, and it very much is connected to leading with purpose, as you said. But it also, one of the things I liked about that program was it also, you identify your weaknesses, and you're cognizant of your weaknesses, and you point them out, and you recognize that they may cast leadership shadows. And so one of the things that Brian said, bringing it back to Brian, was, what he owned his weakness in a way. So there was courage to actually do stand-up comedian as someone who stutters, but also own it to say, hey, this is who I am. It's going to come out. I can't hide from it. You're going to see it. You're free to laugh at it, right? And so when it goes to leadership, we all have traits that when stress hits, we resort to these things that cast these shadows that if you're not honest about it, you're not upfront about it, they can really drive people away from you. Yeah. Or it just creates a dynamic where you're very self-conscious about it. And so I really like that he said that and he presented it up front, and owned it in a way that disarmed any sort of negative connotation that could come from it.
Yeah, it's interesting from that point of taking it into leadership. Of oftentimes if we know our weaknesses or we know the things that we struggle with, we don't advertise those, right?
That's right.
It's not how we approach any kind of meeting or teamwork or any project. And so I think it is fascinating that he was like, I'm going to take ownership of it. I'm going to let you all know that this is a weakness of mine or something that I'm struggling with. And yes, you have permission to laugh because I'm at a point where I'm comfortable with it and I am recognizing and I understand and I'm facing my fear.
That's right.
And that's, deep courage, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's that what we've defined, I think, more and more now is being able to honor your values and your voice, even when it's really hard, and saying, hey, this is what I got, and I'm going to go with it, And I think we've done that, and it just, Brandon, to your question, Shivani, last point, I'm curious for you all, because I feel like what was inside Brian was this ability to see and create story and encourage other people because he had been through it himself, right? He almost had to encourage himself, but he talked about his parents really saying, hey, this is something in me. And he said, you got plenty of time to say no,
Right.
but not a lot of people say yes to whatever is sort of itching away inside of you. And I'm curious for each of you, like, what is something that is inside of you, whether it's a character trait, and I'll say for me, it's almost like you have it, but you've got to use it. And I think for me, it's something I hadn't always used, but you all know I've been self-described as empathetic and, a very sensitive heart. Like I feel things. So Brandon, to your point, it can also be a derailer because I can get too involved in things and people. But I think it's something, what I got inspired from Brian is like, that's what I have, right? Like I can't now run from anymore that this is like what I have, and then I'm emotional. I get moved by little things. So I feel like now it's the ability to express that, and I'm gaining the courage to then use it in a different way, not package it up for, say, corporate America or any community. I'm not knocking corporate America, but I'm in this journey, I feel like, of not trying to package it to where it's digestible or, hey, let me just explain it. It's just, hey, this is me, and use that. So I'm curious for you, as we've been in this sort of learning growth journey, what is something you feel like you've just been innately, it's a gift you've been blessed with, but sometimes it may be harder for you to express or use, or it can get overused?
You want to start with that? Shivani's looking at me. You're looking at me. You want me to start?
They for those of you
Yeah.
watch it, they drew straws. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think Shivani got the story.
All right, I'll go first. So growing up as a kid, I was always known as like the shy one. Even my uncle, my grandfather, great uncle, I guess, used to call me Sharmili, which is basically like turning shy into a little Indian girl's name. And I struggled with kind of reaching out to people and making friends and all that stuff. And even as an adult, I'm very much an introvert, and I can kind of label that now as I've kind of done personality testing and things like that, leadership training. And what I found is that while I am inherently quiet and introvert, what I like to call superpower, right, is that I am a good listener, and I have been able to absorb and observe things that are around me. And the flip side of that is that at some point in my career, I realized that with all of that listening, I was learning stories of people who maybe didn't have a voice and didn't have the platform to have a voice. And I think that's really where my shift came, right? Like I started speaking up in meetings where I normally would be kind of quietly taking notes and processing and thinking and maybe reflecting back in an email or a letter later, finding that I needed to use my voice in spaces where there were not other people at the table that could speak for themselves. I constantly talk about the kids when I'm in spaces where people are mostly talking about adults and how to take care of them or help them. And so I'm now known as the person who's like, oh, what about the children? But I realize that, even now I'm still an introvert, right? If I go to a social scenario, I'm not going to be the one that's going out and interacting with everybody. I'm not a John by any means. But I can take in a lot of things and I can observe. And what I have learned about myself is that I can turn that into then speaking up in the right moments, in the right way.
I
was great. I should have drawn the short straw so I didn't have to follow that. I keep doing that. But yeah, so I think for me, I got a lot of things I could say that may be viewed as weaknesses. I think curiosity is probably one that probably has been characterized as being nosy when I was a kid, right? But just being curious about how things operate, people's story. Why are you the way you are? Why does this operate the way it does? And I feel like now it's embracing that and actually getting to know people and getting beneath the surface and actually wanting to know. Like, I'm genuinely interested in Shivani. What about your kids? Like, I'm genuinely interested in those types of things. And just, if I see a building going up, I want to know the full story behind it. And Google is an amazing tool for me now because I can just be curious about anything. And so I think that's one. The other one I would tell you is just I've been pretty transparent my whole life, so you sort of get what you're getting from me, and sometimes it's not always great because I'll give you honest feedback or exactly how I'm feeling. But in terms of leadership, to bring it back to corporate America, what I've found is that far too often we're not transparent enough with people, and people feel, they feel disinterested, or they feel disinterested is probably not the word, but I guess dissatisfied or unsatisfied with the leadership because they don't know where the direction, they don't know why people make the decisions they make. And so I'm probably overly transparent, but I think that has really helped because people know when I present something that it's the full truth, and if I say I really don't know, they can believe that I really don't know. So I would say those are the two for me that I have come to embrace, not as opposed to being nosy or what's this guy saying, bearing his soul to me. Right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, I appreciate your transparency. I feel like we don't see enough of that.
that's right.
Yeah, and I feel like like even your presence is just probably, I describe it as light, right? Because you're not holding anything back, and I didn't realize it till now. And Shivani, I think I was really struck by what you said, because I think there's a reason that because you are innately gifted as a listener, that when you speak, it has such power. And like people I've seen in board meetings, like they're hanging on every word. And I think it is and maybe for us as we go through this process, right, we're just learning. People say it all, there's seasons of leadership, right? And like, I think when you get to, I'll say age 40, I won't ask your age.
We're there too.
But I think, like, if you've been listening, and sometimes there's moments to speak, and we've said that a lot with courage, right? Sometimes it is saying the words, and then sometimes it's standing with somebody and saying, I'll be right by your side because I know you're getting ready to go do something that is maybe a little scary for you, and you just need that kind of support. So,
In full transparency, whenever I punt over to Shivani, is really because I may have zoned out. And Shivani's such a great listener that I know she's going to bring me back.
I see the class clowns coming out again. Yes.
It's a tactic I learned early on.
Nice.
well, I already see her influence in the note taking,
That's right, she has.
because when I had to take care of the plants or the beans,
Yeah.
I skipped note taking for about 3 days, and then I got a message from somebody, hey, Sahana's asking about the notes. What kind of notes do you have? And I said,
Y'all know in medical
"Oh."
school, I was like an official note taker for school.
Were you
Like,
really?
oh yeah, all the lectures. It was
Whoa.
legit. I love
So
taking
one of
notes.
my calling cards is that I never had to take notes. It's like, I'll just remember it.
Yeah.
But I realize it's probably not the best way to go about things, especially when someone like Brian's saying all these quotes and saying these good things. So I guess, Shivani, you are a positive influence.
Thank you. No, it's the only way I can actually stay in tune. It's
Yeah.
fun
Yeah.
writing things down. The other thing that I really loved that Brian said, and I don't do this probably enough, but he basically said, you can always say no. There's a million excuses that you can make, and they're so easy to make, but especially when it's like a dream that you have, it's always just going to be a dream until you put forth the energy and say yes to it and make it a potential possibility, right? Otherwise, it just stays in your head. So I love that, because I think that we dream about a lot, and we might fail if we say the yes, but that's okay because we tried, and then you don't have regrets about it. But it does take extreme courage, right, to do that.
I think he said what I wrote down, thanks to Shivani for my inspirational note taking.
Love it.
You owe it to yourself to at least try it, right? And if you have this dream, you at least owe it to yourself to try it, and let someone else say no for you, or maybe even if you do receive a no, you still are resilient, but don't tell yourself no before you try it. So I took that away too. That's a great point.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a lot that we're just in this process, the journey of growth, and that when you do say yes, it doesn't mean it has to be that thing, right? For us, we'll see how long, right? The podcast, we are hopeful it's successful, but who knows? It could lead to something else that we hadn't seen. But if we didn't say the yes first, we wouldn't have started to get on the path to getting closer to what that is. And I think that's the important thing as we get connected to values and purpose, is that we stay less attached to what it could look like, because the plan for you is there. It's just, are you ready to really make that step?
To go for it.
Yeah, to go for it
Sure.
and say, okay, well, didn't think it was going to look like that, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, in the spirit of Brandon's transparency, right? When John approached me and we had this first meeting on Zoom, I literally was in the grocery store on Zoom, like ready to pop into the store to do the million things on my to-do list. And I was like, yeah, I'll join you, like maybe once in a while, because I don't know if I'm going to be able to fit into my schedule. I'll just do some summaries at the end. And, the questions kept coming. And I was like, you know what? No, I'm going to say yes.
Yeah.
We're going to do this. And here we are.
And we're so thankful that you did. So.
We are.
Yeah.
We're very thankful, and your note taking is benefiting. So we
Your
all
wife
are.
would be so proud.
I know she would.
Well, I think as we close out today, because Brandon did this to me last time, which was fun, Shivani, we want to have you close out
my
with
goodness.
just like the last minute and take us home.
For sure. So, we had such a great time talking with Brian during our session for the last podcast. And I think he really is the epitome of the three themes that we talk about. And I talked about it in that episode too, just the courage to stand up to your fears and to the things that you think are holding you back. And what that does when you do finally say yes and say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to face my fear. But then turning that into even more, right? So he's flipped that into being that catalyst and saying, hey, you know what? I have a voice. And sometimes I struggle with my voice, but I know that all these other people have voices and they don't always have the platform to use them. And so I'm going to let them do that. And in this very creative way through podcasting, right? So you're able to reach so many more people through this platform and to be able to deliver your message in whatever way that it is, because the way that you deliver it isn't as meaningful as how, just getting it out there. And so he really epitomizes all the things that we talk about here. And I really appreciate it. I feel like we're kind of talking behind his back because he's not actually in the room today. But we totally appreciate his energy and his support and his advice. And I think it's a good lesson to all of us to remember to look our fears in the face and potentially have the courage to say yes sometimes.
Well said.
Wow. Yeah, Mike has dropped.
You might have lost your spot, John.
We're just making so much room in here.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to all our community. Thanks to you all for listening. Check Brian and his team out at Queen City Podcast Network, Balto Creative Media, both on Instagram, all other channels. Check out some listens of the other teams in the network, and we'll see you next time.
We invite you to continue making room with us. You'll find this episode and all of our exciting and meaningful conversations on Apple, Spotify, or really anywhere you choose to listen to podcasts.
Join the Making Room movement and get more info at makingroomwithus.com or follow us on Instagram at Making Room With Us.
Thank you for showing up for us and each other. Until next time.
You are wonderful and full of truth, just as you are. You are wonderful, so full of truth, just as you are. Oh. You are wonderful, so full of truth, just as you are, just as you are. You're welcome here, just as you are.